Hi, my name is Emily DeArdo, and I am thrilled to be speaking to you as part of the Accepting the Gift conference. I just want to start by thanking you for attending this conference. I know that in your job as parents and caregivers of children of special needs, that it can be hard to find time for yourself between all you have to do in running your households and taking care of your family, and then also taking care of your special needs child. And I just want to say that this conference that you're attending today is such a great way for you to hopefully be uplifted and recharged and to know that you are not alone, that there are people all over the country and all over the world who are dealing with the same problems and the same challenges that you are. And so I just want to thank you for attending. And I also want to thank you for just the incredible work you do for your children on a daily basis. I know that sometimes it can be stressful and work that you might not necessarily be thanked for. But I want you to know how much your work is appreciated because you really are a great advocate for your child. You are a caregiver, you're a sounding board, you are that child's shoulder to cry on, you're their defender, and you do it all day, every day, and you deserve so much thanks for that. So I just want to extend my thanks to you for all that you do. And I know all that you do for your children because I saw my parents do it for me, and they still do it for me today. I am a special needs child. So, unlike a lot of the other speakers that you've heard at this conference, um, I'm not a parent, I'm not married, I don't have any children, but I am the child that was taken care of. And I know all the work that my parents have done, and you guys are rock stars. I just want to say thank you for that. Um, so let me tell you a little bit about myself and my story. Like I said, I'm a special needs child. I'm the oldest of three children. My parents are Carmen and Michelle DeArdo, and my dad is a computer scientist. My mom is a stay-at-home mom slash household CEO. My brother Brian is married. He is a sports journalist for CBS News. He covers the Steelers. And my sister is a nurse at Colorado Children's Hospital. So I was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis when I was 11 years old. And if any of you know anything about CF, you know that's a little late. Today, testing for cystic fibrosis is done at birth in a lot of states. But when I was born in 1982, it wasn't. There was no way to know that a child would be born with cystic fibrosis. There was no history of it in my family. If you don't know what CF is, it is an inherited genetic disease that affects the endocrine system in the body. Essentially, what it does is because of a tiny, tiny error on chromosome 7, the mucus in my body and the body of other people with CF is very thick. So we aren't able to clear it as easily. So when you blow your nose or when you cough, and we say you cough something up, that mucus in my body is very thick and my body can't clear it. So it gets stuck in the passageways of the lungs and it damages those airways and closes them. And so eventually the lung tissue is so scarred and so infected that the lungs can't do their job. The condition also affects the digestive system, the pancreas especially. What happens is that same mucus clogs little bits of the pancreas, and so the body can't release the enzymes that are necessary to digest food. So a lot of people with CF are very, very thin. And it's not a good look. Trust me. It's not like a healthy thin. It's a very sort of scary and unhealthy thin. The reproductive system can be affected. And eventually what happens is a person who has CF will eventually die because of lung failure or the other complications of the disease. So I was diagnosed when I was 11. There was no history of cystic fibrosis in my family. So it kind of came out of left field for my parents. My mom knew a little bit about it because before she married my dad, she worked at Pittsburgh Children's Hospital, and she had seen families with CF. She had seen the charts and the reports from the pulmonologists. And so I think she knew a little bit about what we were going to be getting into, but I had no idea. And my case was strange from the beginning because I didn't really cough. I was just very, very thin, and I didn't have a lot of energy. The summer before 6th grade, instead of playing in the pool with my siblings and going on bike rides with my friends, I spent a lot of time just sort of curled up on the lounge chairs at the pool or in my bedroom. I just didn't have any energy, and that was really unusual for me. I was also very tiny. I weighed 58 pounds when I started 6th grade, which is not what I should have weighed, even though I was pretty small. The women in my family are fairly petite, but that just wasn't right. So my mother took me to a new pediatrician at the beginning of the 6th grade year, and she suggested that I be tested for cystic fibrosis at Columbus Children's Hospital here in town. So I was taken in. I had a sweat test, which is sort of the gold standard test for CF diagnoses. People with CF, their skin tastes very salty. So if you licked my hand, it would taste like a salt cellar, essentially. Dogs and cats love to lick me whenever I'm around them because it's that saltiness that is indicative of the problem in the body. So, obviously the test came back positive. I was admitted to the hospital for 2 weeks while we started therapies, inhaled aerosol therapies, but also something called chest physiotherapy, which is where, in order to dislodge that really sticky mucus, you have to vibrate the chest and try to get as much of that mucus out twice a day at least. I know some people now 3 times a day is the standard. So my parents had to learn how to hit me essentially with cupped hands on different areas of my chest twice a day so that we could try to get as much of the mucus out before it became infected. I also started pancreatic enzymes, which made up for what my body wasn't producing so that I could gain weight. And when I was first diagnosed, it was different, but it wasn't, to me, it wasn't scary or upsetting, really. I had, when I heard my parents talking about CF the night before I went in for the sweat test, I went to the World Book encyclopedias that we kept in our dining room, and World Book was sort of the analog version of Wikipedia in 1993. So, and I read, it affects the lungs, it affects the digestive system, it can affect the reproductive system, and at the time, the average lifespan for a person with CF was about 33 years old. And when you're 11, that really doesn't sink in. 33, that's old. I'm only 11. I'll be fine. So, I wasn't really worried about, that it could kill me. That this was going to be most likely what killed me. That didn't really enter my mind. I was used to doctors and I was used to hospitals because when I was 2 years old, I was diagnosed with epilepsy. So I had been going to hospitals for EEGs and blood work and visiting doctors. And so taking pills wasn't really a big thing for me because I had done it for years. Fortunately, when I was 10, we found out that I had outgrown my epilepsy. So we weren't dealing with epilepsy and CF at the same time. But I was very used to doctors. I was used to hospitals. I was used to taking medication. So for me, this is like, well, all right, back to the hospital. So, I went to school. I attended the local Catholic elementary school. So I finished there in 8th grade. I went to the local public high school. And it was in high school that I had my first really bad episode. My type of CF, there are actually, we know now, thousands of different types, different genetic mutations of CF, really affected my lungs in that I was very vulnerable to any kind of crazy bug that was out there in the world. So my sophomore year of high school, I managed to contract non-infectious tuberculosis, which only 4% of the CF population ever gets. So, but we didn't know it at the time. And, fortunately, my parents were really great advocates for me because, at the time, I'm 15 years old. I don't really know, if is this normal, is this not normal, what's happening? The clinic that I went to, there were several different pulmonologists, and the one that I was seeing said, well, this is just part of CF. It's part for the course. This is just the way it is, and you just have to accept that. Fortunately, my parents didn't accept it, and neither did one of the other doctors in the practice, who eventually became my primary doctor, and I saw her all the time. She was willing to dig a little deeper. And thankfully she was, or I wouldn't be here talking to you right now. So, it's one thing, I know you parents are very familiar with, but be willing to make noise. Be willing to say to these doctors, hey, I don't think this is right. Can we please do a little bit of extra work here? So, I was able to go back to classes. I was on a course of really strong medications for the next 3 years because you have to make sure that the TB bugs are really gone. You can't just start and say, oh, it's for a year. No, you have to really make sure that they are eradicated from the body. But, even though I got over the infection, my lung function had taken a really big hit. Before that infection, I had about 80% lung function, which is good. But after that, it was down in the 50s and the 40s and 30s, and I never really recovered from that. I graduated high school. I went to a local university here in town, Capital University. I live outside of Columbus, Ohio, in Pickerington, which is a small suburb. So I went to Capital, which was actually really close to Columbus Children's, so I was very close to my doctors. And when I was in college, we had another really bad episode that actually ended up setting me on the road to receiving a double lung transplant. And what happened was, it was the fall of 2001. It was right after 9/11. So, everybody was very kind of on edge. And I had gotten what seemed like a cold bug that everybody else had at the time. I was living at school, and everybody in my choir had this awful cold bug, and I remember my choir director was freaking out. Were we going to be able to sing at the homecoming concert that weekend? So I thought, well, I just have what everybody else has. The really important thing is I get through the concert and I get through homecoming weekend. So I got through the concert, got through homecoming weekend. My boyfriend and I went to the dance, and the next morning I just felt awful, and my boyfriend ended up taking me to the ER, and that's the last thing I remember until the beginning of November, until All Souls Day. I had contracted an extremely rare, extremely dangerous bug that, as far as my doctors knew, only one other person in the world had had. So I was in the ICU in a medically induced coma for 2 weeks. And all my doctors at that time, they were at the annual CF conference. There's a conference every year for doctors and clinicians and other medical professionals. to talk about, new treatments and new therapies and best practices and things like that. So everybody was in Orlando. And the ICU doctor told my parents that I was not going to come back from this and that they needed to prepare for that. And I cannot imagine how hard that must have been for them to hear. I mean, I was 19 years old. And my mother told me later that she had been in the room with me. She went out to get water to go to the bathroom. Before she came back in, she said to God, "God, you fix her!" And he did. But, there's sort of this idea around, people in certain types of Christianity that say, oh, we can't get mad at God. You can get mad at God, okay? You can yell. You can be upset. You can say, this is not how I want this to go. God can handle it, okay? The important thing is that you have that relationship with him. But, be honest. And my parents were very honest in that moment. Fortunately, again, my fabulous doctor, Dr. McCoy is her name, was able to find the medication that would save my life. And I came home after about a month in the hospital right before Thanksgiving. But at that time, we started to think, okay, Emily keeps getting all these very strange infections. They're taking a lot out of her body. And even though I was taking enzymes, I was still very thin. I think I weighed 110 pounds at the most. And now I probably weighed about 100. I didn't have the body reserves to keep fighting these things. So the next year, my junior year in 2002, when I came, I was in the hospital again, just for what I thought was a normal infection. And my doctor started saying, we need to talk about transplant. We need to talk about getting you listed because otherwise your body just can't keep coming back from these things. And for me, that was a very, it blew my mind because, I was 20 years old, 21 years old, and I had always known that transplant was an option because it was becoming more common. Well, it still isn't all that common. I had heard about it, and I knew that at the Cleveland Clinic they did them. I knew that Children's Hospital in Pittsburgh did them. But I had thought, we were on step like 502 on the CF road, and transplant was like step 600,091. I was not ready for that because really, when I wasn't sick, I felt fine. And I was going to classes. I had a double major. I studied political science and English literature. I was the president of the Catholic Students Organization. I was in the women's chorus. I was in student government. I had a great boyfriend. I was doing all these things. What were new lungs going to be able to give me, Because at the time, I was still relatively, high functioning. I wasn't on oxygen. But then, as I entered my sophomore year or senior year of college, and we started talking about workup, I started to think, okay, let's just prepare and see what happens. And it was a really good thing I did. I managed to graduate from Capital in the spring of 2004 with my class, which was very important to me because when I was in the ICU, and I missed essentially half a semester. So I had to make all that up and still stay on track with all my coursework. So I was really glad that I graduated on time with my class. And then that August, I started working for the state Senate, the Ohio Senate. And while I was there, my health really started to decline. I was in and out of the hospital. in 2005, in March, I was in the hospital for, weeks and weeks. I was doing IV therapy constantly. And, I was listed the spring of 2005 for a lung transplant. And by that point, I knew that without this life-saving double lung transplant, I was not going to see Christmas of 2005. I weighed about 90 pounds. I could have slept for like 14 hours a day. I couldn't walk across a normal sized room without being out of breath. Really out of breath, like heart pounding. I mean, what people feel after they run a couple miles was what I felt walking across the room. I've heard that a really good way to approximate living with CF is to plug your nose and breathe through a straw. I've never tried that, but if you want to sort of imagine what that feels like, give that a try at home. And I was sort of scared. I mean, I knew I wasn't afraid of being dead because I knew that Jesus was going to take care of me. I knew that. But I was afraid of dying. I was afraid of leaving my family because honestly, I didn't think these people would handle it. I was worried about them. I know as parents, you worry about us, but we worry about you too. And, there were every night once I was listed, I mean, God and I had some serious talks, serious, crying, constant. I had to constantly surrender to his will. I had to constantly rely on his strength because there was no way I could do this on my own. Absolutely none. The process of being listed for a transplant, I'll just sketch it for you briefly. You have to be sick enough to need it, obviously, but you have to be healthy enough to survive the surgery. So there's a very fine line. I was very fortunate that the rest of my body works the way it's supposed to, that my problem was really only with my lungs. I had an amazing surgeon, a fabulous transplant doctor. And the other problem was I'm AB positive, which is a very rare blood type. And I'm also fairly small. Right now, I'm 5'3", but at the time I was about 5'2", and that makes it hard to find lungs that are the right size because they obviously have to fit in a certain, cavity. You can't have, lungs from somebody who's 6 feet put into somebody who's as small as I am. So we knew with my rare blood type, I would either have a very short wait or very long wait. And fortunately, I had a very short wait. I received my call from my transplant nurse on July 10th, 2005. And the surgery was performed the next morning, July 11th, 2005, Feast of St. Benedict, on 6 o'clock in the morning, I think. It was a 12-hour surgery. And I spent about a month in the hospital after that. But then that August, I got to go home. And since then, it has been almost 14 years since my double lung transplant. And the transplant that saved my life. I'm kind of like a cat with 9 lives, and I figure I've used about 5 of them, so I've got 4 left. But the really important thing that I want to stress here, in telling you my story, is that it is possible, even within all of these hospitalizations and this unknowing and the stress and the brink of death, to have joy, to live a life that is full of joy and happiness and a full life. There is a few verses in the 9th chapter of John that my Protestant friends, they have this thing they call a life verse, a verse from the Bible that really sort of guides your life or directs your life. And for me, it's John chapter 9, 1 through 3. And in this verse, Jesus is walking, he's walking through Jerusalem. And as he walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that the work of God might be revealed in him." And for me, that sums up so much, and that's such an important verse for me. It brings me so much comfort, and I hope it does for you too, if you've never heard those verses before. Because even though we know, we have biblical proof that God does not send suffering and pain to punish us, it's easy for a lot of people just to believe that. And I remember, one of the things that I heard a lot growing up in Pickerington, where I went to high school and where my family and I still live. It's about 90% Protestant Lutherans. And so I, as a Catholic, was definitely in a minority when I transferred to public school. But one of the things I heard a lot was, well, you would be cured if you had more faith, or if you prayed more. And I always thought that was sort of ridiculous, because it's like, yes, Jesus can heal me. Jesus can work a miracle. I know he can, and he has. The fact that I'm sitting here talking to you is a miracle. But, CF is not a punishment. My parents didn't do something wrong. My grandparents didn't do something wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. This is how God wants his work to be revealed in me. And I know that even when there are a lot of difficult yeses. For example, I always wanted a big family. I love kids. My mom is the third of 8 children, and my dad is the youngest of 3. I have, counting my siblings and I, 25 first cousins on my mother's side of the family. I've grown up with children. I love children. I always wanted, at least 4. That seemed like a nice number. So, I remember telling my doctor when I was a teenager, well, I really want kids. I can't wait to get married and have kids. I was convinced that my vocation in life was to be a stay-at-home mom with a bunch of kids. That's all I ever wanted to do. And, my doctor sort of told me, well, women with CF can't have babies, but with you, you've lost so much lung function. If you got pregnant, it could happen, but it might not be a good idea. And she never totally shut the door, but she said, we would have to be very, very careful. And then once I had a transplant, the opening got even narrower, because there are, again, women post-transplant who have had children. But again, it's hard. It's high risk. You just don't know what's going to happen to the baby because of the strong medications we take to suppress our immune system so we don't reject our lungs. It just became it was really, really tight. But I always thought, well, all right, I'm going to let God take care of that. I can't worry about it. And then last year I entered menopause, and, I'm 37 years old. I will never be able to have children now. And that was very difficult for me to give up that wonderful idea of being a stay-at-home mom with her kids. I will never raise children of my own. And that was a very difficult thing for me. But that doesn't mean that I value my life less. It doesn't mean that I would change anything or take anything back. It's my life. And, it's not perfect. Nobody's life is perfect. But this is the life that God has given me. And it is a good life. And it is full of joy. And it is full of happiness. I saw my brother get married last year to a wonderful, wonderful girl named Sarah. My sister is getting married in June to a great guy named Jason. And, I'll be there. that was something I would never have seen. I would never see my godson grow up. Were there parts of my life that are hard? Are there parts of my life that are hard? Well, yes. And do I get tired of going to doctors all the time? Yes, I do. I mean, let's just be honest here. I don't think any of us are thrilled when we wake up in the morning and go, yes, I get to spend all day at the hospital today. Woohoo! But this is how God wants to work in me. And he is working through my CF and, my transplant life. And this is the path he wants me on. This is the life that he wants for me. I have no idea what's coming. But I trust him to take me where I need to go and to give me the strength I need to get there. And recently, so I was reading the Bible again. I found another verse that I'd like to share with you from St. Paul's letter to the Colossians. And I think this really sums up a lot of, if I had a message for my life, if I want people to take away something from knowing me, this is part of it. So this is Colossians chapter 1, verse 11 and 12. May you be made strong with all the strength that comes from his glorious power. And may you be prepared to endure everything with patience, while joyfully giving thanks to the Father, who has enabled you to share the inheritance of the saints in light. One of the things I love about being Catholic is our idea of redemptive suffering. I was born on Good Friday, 2:47 p.m. on Good Friday. And so my life has always sort of been inexplicably bound up with Jesus' passion. Good Friday has always been a really important day to me, kind of like a second birthday. And, we do not have a God that doesn't understand suffering. Jesus understands it completely. He understands our pain and our loneliness. And when we go to him, we don't have this remote God that doesn't understand our pain, or that just wants to see us suffer, or that is remote from our suffering. He knows it intimately. And we can use that suffering, unite it to Christ's, and use it to find joy. Paul says to the Colossians, joyfully giving thanks to the Father for these things that we have, this trial and this tribulation that we have here on earth has been given to us for a reason. There is joy in that weakness. My CF has made me a person that I wouldn't be otherwise. And I kind of like the person I am. And I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. But I like that I understand suffering and trouble. I feel like I have deeper compassion and empathy for people. I've been able to talk to my friends who are pregnant and who might be facing, questions about whether or not to do prenatal testing, and say, it's your choice, but remember, if that diagnosis comes down, that does not mean that your child is doomed to a life that is worthless. And parents, I think one thing that I would really ask you to do, if you don't already, and I'm sure you already do this, but let your children know how valuable they are. Especially, in this day and age when we have wrongful birth lawsuits and, abortion essentially on demand in some states. Human life that isn't perfect isn't seen as valuable. I've had people tell me that I should not exist, that my mother should have aborted me, that People like me can't have a good life because there's so much suffering, so much pain. I know of at least 2 wrongful birth lawsuits that parents of children with CF have filed. And that just rips my heart out. Benedict XVI said that each of us is the result of a thought of God. Each of us is willed. Each of us is loved. Each of us is necessary. Now, he didn't say, oh, well, only those of you who are physically perfect specimens and, have perfect mental health. Yes, God created you. The rest of you, well, you're mistakes. We won't talk about that. God created everyone with a purpose. No one is here by accident. Your children were given to you specifically. They weren't just given to any parent. They were given to you because you have what those kids need. I remember my mom told me a story a couple weeks ago when I was having, a day when I felt like such a burden on my parents because they have to do so much for me. I'm hearing impaired because of the medication that saved my life. It also destroyed a lot of my hearing, which is hard when you're a singer. You depend on your ears. So I have a cochlear implant and I can't use the telephone. So my parents have to make a lot of phone calls for me. They have to do a lot of extra work for me. And I was having a day where I just felt like such a burden to them. They don't have to do this for my brother and my sister. And my mom told me a story. She said that she had wanted, like me, she had wanted to be a mom, her entire life. And my parents got married in 1979. And I wasn't born until 1982. And when I tell people that, their first assumption is, oh, well, your parents waited. They waited, and then they decided. Well, no, they didn't. They tried hard to have me for years. And, in these prayers that my mom would pray to God about, having babies, she would say, God, I would take great care of a baby who is sick. I would love to take care of that baby. Don't feel like I'm only waiting for a perfect baby. My mom specifically asked for me. And that just sort of blew my mind because, a lot of the time we hear, we'll just pray that the baby will be healthy. But my mom just wanted a baby. And, to me, that was so empowering for me to remember that God answered my mother's prayer. And that, they didn't see me as a mistake or a burden. I was what they wanted. So tell your children that they are valued and they are loved. And make sure they know that. Because the world doesn't tell us that. It tells us that our lives are hard and they're full of suffering and that we shouldn't be here because our lives are really difficult. And yeah, there have been times in my life that were really difficult. Okay, I'm going to be honest here. But the joy overrides so much of that. The joy of my family, of being able to talk to you right now, of knowing God, supersedes anything else. And my life has been richer and fuller because of it. So please, let your children know that. Because the world isn't telling us that. And, it wasn't something I was really aware of when I was younger. But, as I've gotten older, and especially when you work in politics, as I did for 10 years, you can see sort of the ugly side of humanity there, especially when it comes to abortion legislation. And, you hear things and it's hard not to take it really personally. But, you got the family, you parents, you are a defense against that. And you are a testament to that life is always worth it. no matter how hard or how much suffering there is. I mean, I don't know a human being who doesn't suffer, to be quite honest. I mean, do you? I don't. My suffering is just of a very specific physical kind. Mother Angelica said one time that, she really didn't mind being handicapped. She wore leg braces, and she had asthma, and she had lots of physical problems. She said, I can get to heaven with braces on my legs, but you can't get to heaven being spiteful or jealous or, not knowing God. I can get to heaven with my imperfection. And I mean, it is the way of my sanctification. This is how I'm going to get to heaven. Working through this life that God has given me. And that's an important thing to remember. So I want to thank you again for listening to my talk. I want to thank you for attending this conference. And I will pray for you, for your work with your children, for your families. And I will pray that God will give you that joy anyway, joy in your children and in each other and in your families. Because even though life isn't perfect, it's still pretty wonderful. Thank you.